All right, hello. Let's get started. So here's the outline of the talk. I want to sort of motivate the study at hand. I want to talk about my theoretical perspective of frames. I'll introduce the research question that I'm handling this discussion in. I'll talk about the narrative study with Andy, go through the entire sort of story with her. Then we'll discuss some implications and discussion at the end. And so let's get started. So the motivation, why the heck should we care about frames? The way that I sort of think about frames is in this sense of it allows us to filter, organize, and make sense of ideas or information of a situation that allows us to respond appropriately. We all enter a classroom. There's like a million different points of information all around us. How do we make sense of all of that so that we can act accordingly? So for me, knowing instructors' frames allows us to understand more of what aspects of teaching or teaching practices they highlight, or what that means for them and how they want to enact that. So in terms of how do they understand or frame what it means to do active learning? What does that involve? What are the actions that they have to do? And this gives us a glimpse into how instructors understand practices and how to enact things such as student-centric, inquiry-based classroom environments, like I said. Okay, so then why should we care about how frames change? Suppose an instructor used to frame lectures as the best way, it's like the go-to way to teach somebody, right? But then has changed their frame of teaching to have more active group work as a better avenue for students to learn mathematics. How did that sort of change? How did you go from this to that? So Louis and Shiner demonstrated that this type of change is possible, so we know it's possible, but now I'm asking, how is it possible? Or what happened? What experiences or things pushed these instructors for their frames to go from one to the other? Because I want to be able to sort of distill that into a professional development opportunity, or just a sort of discussion that we can have with instructors to potentially push their frames to change. And that's what I just said. I want to meet specifically, can professional development opportunities leverage these experiences, these things that push instructors to change their frames, and can we leverage that? Okay, so theoretical frames. Last RUME, I introduced this, and I've worked on it since then. And so for me, frames of teaching could be understood as interpretive contexts and that support instructors' perceptions, so how they see things, how they understand things, and the enactment of, meaning how do they act on that, what actions do they do, that pertain to their role in the classroom as the instructor, the professional knowledge that's relevant to them at the moment, and types of interactions. So professional knowledge, for those not in the know, this is counseling knowledge, this is content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, managerial knowledge. So all those things that are sort of relevant to them, and we'll see that come up later. So the study research question here is, how do frames of teaching and of students' learning compare before, during, and after an instructor's first time teaching as instructors of record? And so, first of all, I crossed out student learning because this is going to be a long talk if I ended up also talking about that. So we're going to focus on the teaching aspect here because it gives us a nice narrative of Andy's story. And compare here means we're going to compare these three things: their role, their professional knowledge, and their interactions. So we're going to see how those things compare from before, during, and after this person's, Andy's first time teaching. Okay. So the context is we're at a large Midwestern public research university, doctoral granting, research intensive. The mathematics department requires all first-time graduate students and instructors to attend a summer teaching orientation, which lasts about 3 days, a week or two prior to their first day of class. So they help them get set up on how do you do a phenomenal first day of instruction, how do you set those norms, how do you set those ground rules. They enroll in a pedagogy seminar offered by the mathematics department themselves, and then they attend weekly course meetings because the courses that they teach are all convened. Each instructor follows a set of schedules for the topics. But now let's get into who is specifically Andy. So she is a second-year doctoral student who serves as a teaching assistant in the calculus 3-year prior. I don't see recitation and instructors of record as similar experiences. I think there's a sort of advancement in sort of your responsibility when you become an instructor of record, which is why I'm sort of highlighting that. She is teaching college algebra. And in this study, I interviewed Andy before, during, after the semester. along with collecting weekly journal reflections and conducting weekly observations. I conducted thematic analyses on all these interviews, on all these journals, these observations, to sort of build up the narrative of what happened in this semester with regards to her teaching. And again, I also looked at with regards to how she thought about students learning, but that's on the paper, not in the presentation version. So let's get started, because it's a long story. So in the beginning, and before the semester started, I asked Andy and all of my other participants to complete the sentence, teaching mathematics means blank. And right away, she reactively said, struggle. And it caught me off guard. I was like, whoa. And then she saw that I reacted sort of shocked. So then she explained it further as, they're expecting you to teach them a useful skill, which to them will always just be a skill, knowing in your head that there's a beautiful structure to it that they don't want you to give them. And you kind of have to make them want more from it, or you kind of have no right to make them want more from it, and it's like a struggle, okay? And so to me, before the semester started, I sort of thought about how Andy thought about role, and that she is passing down knowledge, and perhaps to students that are not really willing to get more out of it than what is on the syllabus, what is needed from this class. But she still wants to sort of have them appreciate the subjects that she finds beautiful. Okay, so let's take a step into the knowledge side of things. Our conversation mostly focused on content knowledge. When I asked her about a challenging course that she had in undergrad, she talked about how one physics course was seriously challenging for her because she didn't have a cohesive story of how do you go from topic A to topic B, how is that related? And so to her, it was disparate topics. And so what she wanted to really leverage in her teaching is to create this cohesive story throughout the semester so that students had something to lean back on of why are we learning this? Oh yeah, it's part of the story. Interactions to her, since this was before she taught as an instructor of record, we didn't really get to talk about specific instructional moves or interactions that she wants to do. But there was hints about this idea of let's invite students into the conversation and to participate in their learning, and also appreciate the subject that she's teaching. Cool. Okay. And so during the semester is very interesting because the common sort of occurrence in Andy's classroom were students leaving early. Some of them were nice enough to ask for permission to can I leave early, 5-10 minutes before class ended. But some of them just, after they were done working, they would get up and they would leave. And Andy didn't necessarily know how to handle that. And this also came up in her reflections whenever the prompts asked her, what was something challenging or surprising about teaching this week? She often talked about how students didn't seem engaged, they would want to leave early, and having this sort of idea of, I don't know how to keep them in the classroom because of this. So she talked about her role in the classroom as somebody who's seen the material before, so it's still about that passing down knowledge bit. But she said something that struck me, which is I kind of feel like I'm providing a resource by structuring the information in a way that that I think gets the ideas across. But if they don't want to pay attention or do the things that I'm asking to do, ultimately that's them refusing a service that they're paying for. So there was this idea, this dimension of she is doing a service. She was paid, or the students paid for a service, and that she is providing that service, but students are refusing it. And so with this sort of burgeoning, this becoming business framework teaching that I dubbed, and she does call it business later, Andy understood that she needed to focus on content knowledge, that she can better deliver this service with little confusion if she really worked on her content knowledge. Relatedly, and also surprising for her, Andy realized that she needed counseling knowledge with regards to her students who would quote-unquote doom spiral. So when students face an issue in the classroom that they don't know how to do a problem, their group mates would all start being like, oh my God, we're terrible, we're gonna fail this class. And one of her students called it a doom spiral. So she called it that in the interview too. And so she began to realize that she needed more than just content knowledge. She needed some counseling knowledge in terms of how do I get the students to not give up in the learning process? And lastly, for interactions, she talked about mostly how she much preferred individual interactions or small group interactions at most, because whenever she's up in the board, she's lecturing, she doesn't get a good she can't get a good gauge on where everybody is at. If she lectures too fast, she loses the people who aren't able to keep up. If she lectures too slow, then the students who are more, quote unquote, who get it more, are just gonna clock out. They're gonna disengage. So she felt like she's gonna rush lecture, and then when she gets into the small groups, it's like she'll sort of like address people's sort of like specific ideas of, or specific comfort levels. And so after the semester, I was getting to roll again. Andy expressed this apprehension again about demanding students to engage, to pay attention, to leave class, because this didn't feel like it was part of her role. It didn't feel like it was part of her purview or like responsibilities to ask for students to pay attention, because she had this business frame. She was saying like, students paid for it. If they don't want to engage in it, then that's them refusing the service that they paid for. But then when we unpacked this and sort of like interrogated, where did this sort of view come from for you? She said that I had the luxury of being able to spend time on my schooling if I wanted to. And so of course, it's easy for me to be like, oh, this is a business. If you want to learn what I'm teaching you in class, then you will dedicate the time or you won't. So there's this sort of like idea that I paid for this class because I wanted to take this class, and so I will put in the time and effort for it. And also, I think, do I have it here? Okay, I guess I can talk about it here too. But Andy, in that same sort of quote, talked about how, what is it called? Hold on, let me return. She never had to be managed in terms of like confidence level, in terms of like rowdiness. So that's why it was sort of new to her whenever this came up. It is kind of sad though, because when we talked about this business frame of teaching and how she doesn't necessarily quite like it, because she would much rather approach teaching as not sort of as an exchange of goods. But she doesn't believe that she can change it. She believes that this is sort of like a byproduct of the culture of education, the way people see what it means to be college educated, what it means to have what it means to be taught at a college. Students pay for it, they will get something back. However, even though she seems stuck in it, she did add more understanding and enactment of teaching to the following things. Towards role, she did begin to understand that it is part of her purview and her responsibility to ask students to engage and to participate fully in the class and to not leave class early. Towards knowledge, she wanted to leverage again the counseling knowledge before, but also more pedagogical, psychological knowledge with regards to classroom management, like don't be rowdy, please pay attention, all that stuff. And so I want to close off this sort of narrative, because again, after 4 months, after the semester ended, I went and asked her again, complete the sentence, teaching mathematics means. And this time she didn't not abruptly, but like quickly responded. She like took a second and she was like, acceptance. I think you're always gonna want students to see the beautiful thing. I think I said something similar, but maybe a little bit more cynical at the beginning. Again, she said struggle. It's like you want them to see the beautiful thing they don't necessarily care about, but they don't necessarily care about the beautiful thing. But you have to accept that you're gonna try to show them something nice. And maybe they won't get it, but at least they have had to have the thought about it for a little bit, and that's something. And so I saw this sort of as a nice poetic narrative of like, she went from struggle to acceptance. And it reminded me of the stages of grief, and it was like, oh wow, like we reached acceptance at the end. I love that. But just to sort of recap, I had more to say here. So throughout the semester, she understood that her role was generally somebody passing down knowledge to somebody. Before the semester, she really wanted them to engage in the material and sort of understand that even if it is going to be a struggle, she was going to try and do it because she finds the subject beautiful. But during the semester, she found that she couldn't even get them to engage on just the thing that they paid for. And so how can she even get to the beauty part? But then lastly, because of all of those things and of unpacking the ideas, she gets to this acceptance stage where and she realized that she can ask students to participate, she can ask them to engage, like that is part of her responsibility. It is not just her job to teach them the content or deliver the content, there has to be some sort of like buy-in for her to do. which is, I think, a really nice story. All right. So the other thing that I sort of kind of touched on in the findings is she struggled during the semester, like she said she was gonna, but in a different way. And so when I asked her during the semester, I was like, why are you not changing the way that you're teaching? What's stopping you from changing? And she felt the pressure to sort of stick with the script of like, she started the semester in a certain way. She started the first day by letting students leave early. Because she's like, well, I don't want to do content too much on the first day and we're done. So I guess I'll let students leave early. And so to her, if she demanded students to stay the whole 75 minutes, that to her was breaking a promise that she set on the first day. On one part, again, this was connected to the culture of education that Andy spoke towards. She sees that students see education as something they paid for. On another part, this is sort of a common worry with the other instructors that I sort of talked to for my dissertation. They feel some sort of like fear about changing in the middle of the semester. They believe that they're not allowed to do that. If they start in a certain way, they have to keep that script. And then on another part, Andy was also spread thin with her responsibilities. So she didn't have the capacity to experiment. She barely had enough room in her sort of plate to be able to handle teaching this class effectively. And so to her, if it was working the first 2 weeks, why change it? Because I can't experiment right now. And so the implications is we confirmed that frames could change in a short time and without intentional professional development, because Louis and colleagues and also Shiner confirmed that you can change it, but it's in the context of years maybe. Shiner showed that in the span of one semester of PD, you can push somebody's frames to be more equitable. And so I was sort of investigating, if I just investigate somebody teaching for the first time, will their frames change? And in this sense, hers didn't necessarily change too much. She feels stuck in it, but there's this narrative of understanding what it really means for her to teach here. So what now? So that is a lie. Intentional professional development. I did technically give her professional development because I asked her to think about her teaching, to think about how it means for students to learn, and that in a way is a form of professional development. But I did not intend to push her to change her frames. But that might be something that we could do. We ask people to actually think about what it means to teach for them, what it means for their students to learn, and unpack what that means for them. And so the next sort of implication here is PD might serve novice instructors like Andy better if professional developments included stories and narratives from previous instructors to demystify what it means to teach the realities. She never thought that she had to classroom manage college because to her, she never had to get classroom managed, so why does she have to do that? But maybe if she had heard stories about it, then she would be more prepared to sort of handle and interact with that sort of struggle, that hurdle. And lastly, Andy and other graduate student instructors juggle competing responsibilities of being both a student and an instructor. So we need to find a better way to sort of help their dual identity, right? And thank you for listening to Andy's story. Any questions? I'm also checking Zoom for questions. Very good question. So there was 3 participants, because this is part of my dissertation. There was 3 participants. There was Andy, Carlos, and Paul, teaching all different classes. And all of them exhibit some sort of re-understanding of their frames are. Not so much of a drastic shift of somebody who went from anti-deficit ways of framing teaching and learning to now deficit ways of teaching and learning, like you might have seen in Louis' work, Louis, Abdurasia, and Jessup's work, where they showed a comparison between anti-deficit and deficit ways of framing. So nothing of that sort, but there was sort of the way that I've been phrasing is that their frames began to crystallize within the semester. Like before the semester, they had some vague idea of what this means for them, but then throughout the semester, I sort of see it as getting more crystallized, getting more concrete. They believed in it a lot more. They understood what that really means in a classroom. But yeah. So that's a very good question. It's one of the things where I thought I wasn't doing professional development for them, so I never really pushed it too far. But I think the sort of short answer for that is just telling them that it is completely fine for you to change teaching. Because I do that in my teaching. My first time teaching, I introduced myself to the classes. This is my first time teaching this class. So if things change in like week 6, it's because I learned something new about teaching. And so to me, that was like a really nice framing for my students to expect that it's going to change. And it's not something that I shared with Andy because I didn't want to like intentionally push her in a certain direction. But had I really leaned into this idea of sharing my knowledge, I feel like she would have felt more compelled and less pressured to adhere midway through the semester, like, wow, I really don't like the perception that I have of education right now. I would like to change it. But yeah. Okay, wonderful question, because I didn't get into it. But there are a few benefits for Andy that was allotted to them because of this sort of, I'm giving a service to a student. She really heightened her understanding of what it means to, what is it called? When you tailor sort of an explanation to a student. Because since she viewed it as you paid for me to teach you, I now have to conform what it means for me to teach to you because you learn in a different way than I prefer to learn. So that's one of the conversations that we had that didn't make it on the slides because I didn't talk about students learning. But one of the things that she talked about is, I prefer to learn mathematics differently, but I was teaching it initially as this way. But throughout the semester, whenever I interacted with individual students, I began to sort of change what it means, how I explain something to how they want to learn. And so that's sort of a positive in terms of this idea of business frame. Like, it's not all doom and gloom for her. There was some benefits because she understood it as, now I have to like make sure that the student is getting what they wanted out of this class. Yeah, great question. So for Andy, the most surprising thing for me was to hear this sort of consciousness. Like, she's the one that brought up this business word. The reason why I call her frame a business frame of teaching is she's the one that brought it up. And then we had this really nice nuanced conversation of where it came from. And she had such a sort of thorough understanding of what this means and where it came from and what it's useful for her, that a lot of the things that I had to do in terms of analysis is kind of like, she kind of did half of the job. So that was really surprising for me. I had 2 other participants. Paul, who I did not get to talk to yet, actually talked about how their frame of learning and frame of teaching were really intertwined. Their frame of teaching is the how, the what, the how, and the why of mathematics. And they also talked about how that's how they viewed learning. They have to address the what, the how, and why you're learning this mathematics. And so that was surprising to me, how somebody was able to sort of articulate that to them teaching and learning are so intertwined that they couldn't like come up with a different way of framing one or the other. And then the last one that I like to share, this is like, I think the 3rd time that I'm sharing it at RUME. Carlos was the one that said that people should be good classmates to each other. Not just good students to him, but he really wanted to embed this idea, this lesson of students should learn how to be good classmates in my classroom. And that was really surprising for me because I'd never heard it. It's a good sort of sentiment, and I have began to sort of share it. I'm not teaching this semester, but I really wanted to share that if I ever, like whenever I teach again, is it gonna be like day 1 syllabus, be a good classmate to each other. Right, since we have some time, I wanna show off an extra slide. So I did go through, not just the role part, which you saw, I did go through the knowledge and the interactions bit. So if you go to the slides later, or when you're reading the text version, you'll be able to sort of see this. I didn't put this in the room proposal because there was too much space and I was running out of pages. But it is sort of like this nice sort of chronology of before, during, and after, and how her sense of role, knowledge, and interactions changed. But yeah. Right. That is all for me. Thank you so much.